Alright, so you want a phone for around the £100 mark that has a great camera and it's around the 5-inch form factor. Whilst I could link you to the GSM Arena phone finder page, where would the fun in that be? So today I'm going to put the Sony Xperia Z3 and the Galaxy S5 head to head to see which of the phones is better. Hey guys, my name is Ryan Thomas and this is my take on the Z3 versus the S5 in 2017. Something that I need to address is that some users have had problems with overheating when it comes to the Z3, especially when using the camera and recording the 4K video. Note that this happens with some of Sony's dedicated cameras too, bit weird. And with the S5, I feel like a broken record at this point. Knox is a thing. Custom ROMs are not going to be easy to get on this thing if you are into that kind of a thing. I've said thing way too many times there. Both of these devices came out in 2014, which is weird to think 3 years ago as of 2017. It doesn't feel like 3 years. And so you are missing out on some of the features with the Sony at the very least. But these phones came out at a stage where the features that we see in the latest phones were first being implemented, such as the fingerprint scanners on the S5, ingress protection ratings on both, better build on the Z3, 4K video recording on both. But it was also the time where features like microSD expansion and removable batteries were starting to become features on phones few and far between. The designs of these phones differ incredibly, with Samsung going for a more utilitarian build with function over form. The Thing has almost everything that hardcore enthusiasts want, like microSD expansion, removable and upgradable batteries, and a fingerprint scanner. But it also catered for the public with the chrome plastic on the outside and a textured back and the standard fare of I/O of buttons that we are used to seeing. This meant that new users didn't have a bad time with this device and it just kind of works like the rest of Samsung's lineup. I'm personally not a fan of the design, but I do like the function that comes as a result of it. The interchangeable backs I do like, with blue being my favourite for obvious reasons. No curved edges and no metal body really found in the external build at all. Transitioning to the Z3 then, where metal and glass is used in its full here, with a full slab of glass on both front and rear with metal rails going around the outside, kind of like how modern phones are. This could be compared to early Apple iPhones, but I think Sony actually did it better personally. This green one isn't the best example of what it could look like, but I think it looks pretty sharp. Matt, the owner, kept it in a case for its entire life, so yeah, he uses this thing as his daily and has no problems. With a Colombian background, he has set a lot of his menus into Spanish, which is something you don't really see every day living in Cornwall. You know, we don't get a lot of diversity here, but definitely having the menus in Spanish was a bit of a weird thing for me to see. The phone has held up surprisingly well considering its age and that it's a hell of a lot of glass. The S5 has an IP67 rating, which means that it's dust and water resistant up to 1 meter of water for 30 minutes. The Z3 actually one-ups the S5 here with the ingress protection rating of 68, which is dust and water resistant for up to 1.5 meters of water for 30 minutes. Both designs actually use the flaps over the ports compared to IP68 phones of today, which don't, like the S7 Edge, but again, you still get the features even if they're not perfectly refined yet. The screens on these phones are fairly similar in size, with 5.2 inches on the Z3 and 5.1 inches on the S5. This size is something that I feel is good for content consumption and generally using the phone. However, a lot of people do want phones around the 4 to 4.5 inch form factor, so for you lot, these phones are not for you because the screen to body ratios are kind of high as well, so overall it creates a bigger phone. This means that the bezels are quite big, and that's a good and a bad thing. Good because it gives you more space to actually grip the phone instead of touching the screen, and bad because it's not the most aesthetically pleasing thing on the planet. I do actually like the screens on these devices. I personally prefer the Samsung panel, which is 1080p and Super AMOLED, which you guys know me, I love Super AMOLED and I love this screen. Looks really good, deep blacks, lots of contrast and saturation, just fantastic screen. Quite literally a brilliant screen. The Sony screen is slightly bigger and has an IPS panel, so this means better color accuracy and viewing angles, but in my opinion, it's not actually as fun to look at because it's not as saturated and all that kind of good stuff. With the cameras in these smartphones are absolutely stellar for their age, and the fact that they're phones, they're not specific cameras. They do offer quite a lot in spec though. Samsung went with a 16 megapixel sensor with f2.2 glass and the ability to shoot 4K video on the S5 compared to Sony's offering, which is 20 megapixels, yeah, you heard that right, with f2.0 glass and the ability to shoot 4K video like the S5. I do really like the Z3 because it was my first phone that I came into contact with that was able to shoot 4K video. In fact, it was the first device I think I've ever been able to shoot 4K video on, it being my buddy Matt's. My buddy Matt bought this one a number of years back, and it was incredible to me that you could zoom in 2 times and it would still be 1080p. But I digress. Neither of these devices do have optical image stabilization according to GSM Arena, which is a bit of a problem if you want to shoot any usable video with the average shakiness of normal hands. Both cameras do shoot 720p at 120 fps, which means your slow motion thirst can be quenched. Photos and videos are easily good enough for social media and YouTube. Photos on the Z3 I would say are good enough for high quality prints too, because it's 20 megapixels, I mean really. Note that the Z3 can overheat from shooting 4K video extensively, although not all of its units suffered this. And again, I repeat myself, a lot of Sony's actual cameras do this as well, bit weird. The selfie cameras on these phones are pretty unexceptional, with both having 2 megapixel front sensors and the ability to shoot 1080p at 30 fps. It's difficult to discuss selfie cameras because they're all really the same on these phones at this price range, although I do prefer the super wide angle lens on the S5 over the slightly less wide angle lens on the Z3, because you can fit more of your mates in the shot, and so selfies can look quite a bit better without the need of a selfie stick. These phones are almost neck and neck when it comes to performance. They both have Snapdragon 801 system on a chips, which is pretty substantial, and it was a great chip at the time. It's to the Snapdragon 800 what the 821 is to the 820, a slight performance bump for the sake of selling a new phone. Both phones are available in 16 and 32GB configurations with microSD expansion up to 256GB, but the Z3 unit comes with 1GB more RAM, with 3GB, where the S5 only had 2GB of RAM. I personally prefer the Z3 for its slightly less obtrusive skin and more pleasant and easy ROM installation process. Games, everyday apps, watching videos and listening to music are all perfectly doable on both of these devices. I can play Pokemon Go on my S4 with the Snapdragon 600 and 2GB of RAM, so you guys will be able to play your games on these newer and much more powerful phones for sure. The software experiences on these devices are fairly different, with Samsung going for a lot of bloatware such as Samsung apps, Galaxy apps, S-Health. Wait, hold the phone. S-Health is actually really useful because it makes use of that heart rate monitor and actually works at automatically tracking your training without needing to have the app open. Sony takes a less hardcore approach by opting for a slightly less obtrusive skin on top of Android. I personally prefer the software on the Z3, but that's just my opinion. If I was to actually own one, as the one shown in this video is my buddy Matt's, then I'd for sure make sure I installed custom software and made it my own by removing background processes and making use of shortcuts. If you're sticking with stock software, which if you're on an S5 you probably are, then they started off with 4.4 KitKat, both of these devices, and are now apparently available with the upgrade of 6.0, which means you shouldn't need to sideload anything to get your recent Android fix because they are available over the air. The batteries on these phones are different, with the S5 having a removable and upgradable 2800 mAh battery. This means that you can upgrade it with a battery back such as the one I have on my S4. The Z3 has a slightly bigger battery at 3100 mAh, but this is not removable, so this means if you're stuck with an average battery in an older phone, it's probably going to degrade a lot, and it means that your screen on time is going to go down. Now, Matt reported 5 to 6 hours of screen on time, which is pretty impressive actually for this old thing. And you'll be expecting 4 to 5 hours of screen on time on the S5, that's from my personal testing. Although you can probably save a lot of that battery if you run black backgrounds on it, being an AMOLED screen, change all the items to black on the S5, meaning that it won't have to light those pixels and can save you a lot of battery life. And of course you can kind of do a similar thing where if you switch the software out on the Z3 to your own software, you can actually make it quite a bit more efficient. The speakers are very contrasting when it comes to these two devices. The S5 has a rear speaker which is small and fairly distorted, but it's good enough for watching YouTube, procrastinating for when you need to get up in the morning, you know, when you're going to college or work. The Z3 on the other hand has a pair of stereo front firing speakers that flank the screen top and bottom. They are much clearer and sound pretty much the best that I've heard in an older phone. They're even better when you're watching video as well because they're pointing at you and are in a stereo configuration like I said before. Opening the charging port on your S5, if it still exists, which as you can see mine clearly doesn't, you will find a micro USB 3.0 port. Yep, that oversized micro standard port is 3.0, which means more bandwidth when transferring data to and from your computer, but that's about it. The Z3 uses a more conventional 2.0 port, and they both support 3.5mm headphone jacks, which means you won't need any adapters like on the iPhone 7 unfortunately. In terms of expansion, both phones feature micro SD expansion ports which can handle up to 256GB cards for all of your offline media needs, and the S5's battery can be expanded too if you change the battery out, so that's about it for expansion. I would recommend both of these devices despite knocks on the S5 and the overheating issue on the Z3, as much as fanboys love throwing around hate about different brands. But the Z3's overheating issue is just as bad as the S5's NOx issue, which is the same as the 5S's battery life issue, which is the same as boot loops on LG devices. There are always going to be slight issues with the older phones, but that's kind of part of their character. I personally prefer the Z3 to the S5, but the S5 one-ups with a fingerprint scanner and an OLED screen. I guess I just value the build quality and speakers of the Z3 because of course it doesn't have a fingerprint scanner. Or maybe it's the fact that Matt, the owner of this phone, is a great old mate of mine, and maybe that creates a bias. Either way, you've had my opinion on both of these devices, so thank you very much for watching, guys. Like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you really didn't like it, and comment telling me what you think. Subscribe if you're new to never miss a video like this one, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.